First, let me introduce this sermon a little bit. I've listened to sermons before in progressive churches, and one thing that I kind of miss from the old fundamentalist days is Bible readings. We're going to have a lot of Bible readings this time. By the way, there's no reason to worry about Bible readings because these are actually about what Jesus taught. And Jesus was actually a very progressive teacher. And this was not progressive by the standard of 2,000 years ago. That is progressive by today's standard. Now, about the Pharisees, they were a religious organization, just as at the same time there was another organization called the Sadducees. And the two of them formed a governing body called the Sanhedrin. And they were kind of a combination of a court and jury and judge and also a legislative body. They worked totally at the whim of the king, and the king also worked totally at the whim of the Empire of Rome, because Rome had conquered that part of the world at that time. But the real question is, what did Jesus think of the Pharisees? And now we start the Bible readings. First, we have Matthew 23, chapter 23, verse 27. Woe to you, teachers of law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of the bones of the dead and everything unclean. We got more. We have Matthew 23:14. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you devour widows' houses, and for a pretense you take long prayers, and therefore you will receive greater condemnation. Matthew 23:23. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. Now, when I was a child and I was being taught about the Pharisees in the Baptist church, they said that basically the Pharisees, well, first of all, were hypocrites, that they would preach the law but not follow it. But I think that there's another part that they didn't really talk about. They claimed that the Pharisees were a fraud. And I personally don't think that they were frauds. I think that they were sincere. I think that they were devout. And there's a couple of reasons to support this. First of all, just the normal human nature. If you have a religious organization, you might find a few frauds in that organization, but believe me, it will not be an organization of frauds. Frauds will tend to go around and look for sincere people to mix with. They won't all mix together. And next, we have a reference to Matthew 23:15 that, if you look at it properly, shows their sincerity. It says that the Pharisees will travel a great distance to make a convert. Well, if they were not devout, they wouldn't be traveling great distances and putting forth a lot of effort to make a convert. They would just look around local and pick the low-hanging fruit. They would do the easy stuff. They wouldn't do the hard stuff to try to make a convert. So now imagine these people. They are devout, they are sincere. At the same time, they are hypocrites because they are following a book of laws that is based on love, but they are not actually expressing the love. And from there we have the conflict between Jesus and the Pharisees, because Jesus would practice and teach love. And an example of this is the story of the woman who was caught in adultery. So this is now direct reading from the Bible, John chapter 8, verses 1 to 11. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning, he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery. And placing her in the midst, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now, in the law of Moses, it commands us to stone such a woman. So what do you say?" They said this to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. But Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And they continued to ask him, and Jesus stood up and said, "Let who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." And once more he bent down and wrote in the dirt. And as he was writing in the dirt, the Pharisees started to leave one by one, the oldest first, until there was nobody else there. And then Jesus stood up and said to the woman, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" And she said, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on sin no more." So in other words, Jesus practiced love here and spared the woman. But there's something important to understand about what happened, and you will see that if you go back to the original law and read the law, and this is one of those that you don't normally hear in this church. This is Leviticus, the book of laws, chapter 20, verse 10. If a man commits adultery and the wife of his neighbor, both the adulterer and the adulteress, shall surely be put to death. So in other words, Jesus had a tricky way to break the law without actually breaking it. Now, I think the reason for this is obvious. The minimum sentencing of the law was death, but it was a crime to carry out the sentence. And Jesus recognized that it was a crime to carry out the sentence. So he works around and avoids it. So you can see now the Pharisees would hate Jesus because Jesus is not following the laws in their eyes. And Jesus would hate the Pharisees because the Pharisees want to commit a crime in order to follow the law. But enough of this 2,000 years ago. The title of this sermon is "Who are the Pharisees?" not "Who were the Pharisees?" So let me give you some hints on how you can find the Pharisees around you. Excellent. I like the laughter. You might be a Pharisee if you won't let your kids watch Harry Potter because it's about witchcraft. You might be a Pharisee if you won't let the church sponsor a dance because dancing inspires carnal thoughts. You might be a Pharisee if you believe that Jesus turned water into grape juice. Well, we know grape juice does not contain alcohol. You might be a Pharisee if you will not read aloud in the Bible Numbers chapter 22, verse 21, because it says that Balaam got up early that morning and saddled his ass. You might be a Pharisee if you believe that laughing in church is disrespectful. It might be disrespectful to God, of course. Is God laughing at any of this? I hope he is. I would rather him laughing at me than not. So who are the Pharisees today? Remember, these are people who claim to be Christians, because we're going to have it in a Christian context, but they aren't truly Christians. One group that comes to mind is the Ku Klux Klan. Honestly, they claim to be Christian. They call themselves a Christian organization. Their symbol of a burning cross, they picked a cross, partly because they want to claim that they're a Christian. But I would not call them Pharisees because of an important part is that they do not really try to be a religious organization. So if I'm going to look for Pharisees, I'm going to look for religious people or religious organizations. But don't worry, I think that Jesus would condemn the KKK. So who are the Pharisees today? Perhaps Fred Phelps, the leader of the Westboro Baptist Church. And Fred Phelps, if you have not heard of him, he likes to get into the news, or liked, because he went to his final reward earlier this year. Anyway, he likes to do things like picket the funerals of soldiers, because he says that since since the military is too accepting of gay people, he then condemns all soldiers and says that the soldiers who have been killed in battle are receiving the retribution of God. So Fred Phelps is actually a person who celebrates hate And it's very easy to condemn him as a Pharisee, and I personally would do so. But now look around to people that you actually know, people that aren't in the news, and try to find a Pharisee, and that becomes a lot more difficult. At least it is for me, because I do not have the discernment that Jesus had. I can't really see the motivation of people and understand them like he did. So all I can do is think of examples that hinted at something and compare them to me. And there is the nice Christian lady at the farmer's market. I don't know her name right now, but we would stop and we'd talk some. Once in a while we'd talk about religion. And one time on her table she had a series of magazines, Christian magazines, and she offered to loan one to me, and I picked one out because on the cover it talked about illegal immigration in Texas. And I was really curious what the Christian magazine would say about illegal immigration. And what it said was that the ranchers that owned land in Texas were very much concerned about trespassers. Also, they talked about people smuggling drugs in backpacks across the border, across the desert, and that people are concerned about the influence of drug gangs along the borders of Texas. And after I read the article, I thought to myself, you know, if Jesus was on the border of Texas and he was preaching and performing miracles, he would cause water, fresh water to flow for the people dying of thirst as they cross the border. He would help people organize places where people then could find to sleep safely so that they would not be victims of gangs. But none of this was mentioned in the article in the magazine. So when I returned the magazine to the lady at the farmer's market, I thanked her for the magazine, and I said that it looked to me like it was more of a politically conservative viewpoint expressed by the magazine rather than a Christian viewpoint. She gave me the funniest look. I don't think she'd ever concerned that it's possible for a contradiction between Jesus' teachings and conservative politics. But that hints at being a Pharisee. We have my cousin who sent an email out to a bunch of people in the family talking about a deadly spider that likes to hide under toilet seats. And these toilet seats tend to be in dirty gas stations where people will be traveling, and perhaps it's the only place where they can find a toilet. And the email suggested that this deadly spider was actually being accidentally imported by illegal aliens walking north from the border. So actually I researched, first of all, this spider does not exist. There is no such thing as a spider being imported. I sent her an email and told her that this spider does not exist, that she did not originally write the lie, but it is truly a lie, and that she has been spreading this, and she ought to let everybody know. And she basically disagreed with me. She said, well, she didn't write the lie. She was sincere in what she sent, and she's honestly practicing love to everybody that she meets, even though I told her that this type of story promotes misunderstanding and prejudice and discrimination, and that it's far from love. I have my sister-in-law who is very much concerned about polio being brought up from south of the border. And I did a little bit of research, found out that polio does not exist in the Western Hemisphere. It was declared irradiated in 2012. Right now it only exists in a couple of pockets in Africa and in southern Asia. And that you do not have to worry about immigrants bringing polio from south of the border because they'll never have it, just like we don't have it. Again, she didn't really see that this was an issue of prejudice and love and the two contradicting each other. But really, these people I'm telling you about seem to express love better than I do. I mean, a lot of you know me. I can be kind of pokey at times. These people won't do that to you, but I will. So I don't have the discernment of Jesus, so I'm not going to say that they are a Pharisee, because after all, do I really do a better job than them? How am I to say? I don't honestly know. So, comes to the conclusion of Pharisees, but this being an open forum, we're supposed to have a lecture on follow your bliss. Honestly, this is all about following your bliss. If you really do practice what Jesus told you, and you do practice love, you're going to follow your bliss. And there's another bliss here. And if you've been watching me, you can tell what that is. And that's public speaking. I recommend it.